What makes a film or television production Canadian? Is it the story, the cast, the crew, the location, the writer? When we talk about Canadian productions, our minds might go to films like Atinarjawat, or shows like Corner Gas. These are works that are unmistakably Canadian. But what about when the Canadian identity shows up in the shadows, behind a mask, beneath a uniform, or inside a spaceship? In Canada, it has long been debated exactly what constitutes as Canadian, and consequently there's been a number of different takes on it over the years. Charles Acland, in his essay A Taxing Culture, essentially argues that Canadian film identity is not betrayed, but rather sustained by international productions. These films are built in our studios, shaped by our crews, and sometimes resonate directly with Canadians in ways that no other nation can understand. In this video essay, I will argue that Canadian content isn't simply some matter of propaganda, branding, or paperwork. It's something felt and recognized, a signal from Canadians to Canadians. Sometimes it's quiet, a background vibration, but I'd say that identity is still there. In fact, often there is a palpable sense of Canadian identity that exists in media that isn't officially Canadian at all. To understand how we got here, we need to start at the beginning, which is to say we need to start at the Canadian Government Motion Picture Bureau.
Propaganda in the air, everywhere I go. The government's always right, or don't you know? They got their spin doctors and their clever schemes, making sure we all believe their fantastic themes.
Before the National Film Board, it was the Canadian Government Motion Picture Bureau that handled Canadian productions. But this early era of film wasn't aimed at building a national culture so much as trying to sell Canada to investors, immigrants, and tourists. Its films showcased industry and nature, all in the pursuit of economic promotion. The idea of selling Canada to Canadians and building our culture didn't really come into vogue until the arrival of John Grierson and the creation of the National Film Board. I believe it's safe to say that Grierson is the person who determined one of the first real definitions of what is a Canadian production. To him, it fell squarely in the realm of what he called democratic propaganda. It was a tool used to unite us through a common and nationalistic voice. One that would describe and forge a unified Canadian character. The most obvious example of this mentality might be the series Canada Carries On. But surely Canadian productions are more than the World War II era propaganda that we pumped out. As Zoe Druick points out in her essay, The NFB and Government, these films were tools of social regulation. They helped shape behavior, reinforce norms, and produce citizenship. A prime example of Foucault's governmentality. I, at the very least, like to think Canadian productions are more than this shallow take on art. So what is the answer? The current official metric is CanCon, a set of regulations that determine funding and broadcasting eligibility. But a production can technically qualify as CanCon without feeling particularly Canadian to the viewer. What you're seeing now are short films I made with other Canadians. But nothing in them is particularly Canadian. No flag, no snowy small town, no A. And yet, they are Canadian, because we made them, and I believe you can feel it, if you know what to look for. Furthermore, this sense of feeling it extends to many productions that do not meet the conditions of CanCon. Let's talk about Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis. These shows were often mistaken for being purely American shows. After all, they were based on a Hollywood film, funded by international investors, and starred the former MacGyver. But if you look closer, you start to see Canada. The shows were shot entirely in Vancouver, and much of the cast, crew, directors, and writers were Canadian. The cities, the forests, the alien planets, All of it was shot in the diverse landscape that is Canada. Furthermore, you can see it in the fun they have with Rodney McKay, portrayed by the well-known to Canadian audiences David Hewlett. His character was the first Canadian character in a show made by Canadians, and they had several ZZ jokes that truly only a Canadian audience was going to appreciate.
Got it. Okay, Sergeant, give it a try. This FPM should light up when it senses a conductive connection to the gate.
Legally, Stargate is not Canadian content, but culturally, it's steeped in our infrastructure and creative labor. 2015's Dark Matter is another science fiction show filmed in Canada, but this time more specifically in Toronto. But it is assumed by many to be entirely American. This show is even more Canadian, not just in the crew or location, but also because one of the creators, Joseph Malozzi, is Canadian. It is particularly obvious when you watch this scene from episode 4, season 3, wherein one of the characters is caught in a time loop and learns French to prove that it's happening to the rest of the crew. This premise ends up providing us with this hilarious and very French-Canadian moment. A final television example that I want to look at that is a little closer to home is The Last of Us. Although it's never as overt as Dark Matter or even as Stargate, The Last of Us has locations throughout Season 1 that will be immediately familiar to any Albertan. Furthermore, it is a point of pride that this high-quality show was made by us. It may be an American story, but it is a Canadian production by our blood, sweat, and tears. We know those streets, we know that work. It's ours, and the world adored it. We may work on productions that are often from the United States, but by filming them here, they become in some sense Canadian through us. Be it a Marvel blockbuster, a 90s sci-fi epic, or prestige television, the Canadian influence is there in everything we do. Like us, it isn't always loud, it doesn't need to yell about its importance. But it is a quiet and persistent reflection of who we are, even when the official paperwork doesn't say so.